Hello everyone, this is Tom. I hope you're doing well. I'm going to talk about Canto 23 today of Inferno. So we only have 77 to go to finish this project. Canto 23 is really interesting. It's the sixth Bolgia of Malebolge, and so we are getting closer and closer to Lucifer, as you know. It's not a difficult canto to understand, at least it's still linked very closely to Canto 21 and 22. They constitute almost a single narrative segment as we've seen. So I really don't want to waste time rereading portions of the canto that are already immediately clear and self-explanatory. But I'll try to limit myself to maybe some highlights and comments that I hope will be useful on this particular canto, because as always there are some really complex elements in this canto as well, and there are some really beautiful details as well that I would like to highlight. So as I said, we are in the sixth Bolgia. We have left Dante and Virgil, who started walking by themselves and leaving the devils to their antics. In this first tertina, the first tertina of the canto, Dante manages to tell us that, refer to the previous canto, to the previous scene, and also to directly refer to what we're going to see in this particular canto. In Italian, the tertina is Taciti soli senza compagnia. Pinsky translates as silent alone sans escort, with one behind, using this French way of saying, with one behind and one before, as friars minor use. We journeyed. And it's okay, it's just personally, I tend to prefer Kirkpatrick translation, which is silent alone with no one now beside us. We went our way, the one behind, the one leading on, the other leading on, walking as meek Franciscans do. Kirkpatrick specifies that Dante is actually referring to Franciscans. The Franciscan order was, we discussed about this in some previous cantos, particularly dear to Dante, and there is a possibility, even if it's not proven or demonstrated, that as a young man, Dante was actually part of San Franciscan order in terms of his laity, but we're not sure about that. In any case, he is showing, and is possibly showing that by saying the one behind, the other leading on, or in Pinsky, one behind and one before, bringing our attention to the relationship between him and Virgil, that, as we've seen, has been shifting profoundly. Now, Virgil has been gradually losing more and more authority in the eyes of Dante, and Dante is gaining confidence. So then in the second tertina, Dante brings up this curious fable from Aesop, and I've seen some commentators say that it might technically not be an Aesop fable, because in Dante's times there were books of fables, ancient fables, that were going under the name Aesop, like Aesop, even if they were not technically some of his. It's a technicality. But Dante, the character here, is thinking about this fable. And what he's saying in Italian is that che più non si pareggia mo e issa, che l'un con l'altro fa, se ben s'accoppia. The similarity between this particular fable and what Dante has just seen is very strong. So strong that, like Pinsky says, now and this moment are not more similar. This is one way to translate what Dante is saying. Dante is actually literally saying mo and issa, which is mo from modo in Latin, now, and issa, again from Latin, ipsa ora, again it means now, so the meaning is exactly the same. But I've seen it translated a little differently by Mark Musa. He is saying For yon and there could not be more alike than the fable and the fact. Yon and there. And Kirkpatrick says now and new. For now and new, or no, are hardly more alike than this fine mess to that. The interesting fact about this comparison that Dante makes in a direct way, we're almost feeling like, okay, finally Dante is telling us something very clearly and openly. Yes, but it's still problematic because a lot of commentators and scholars have been fighting and arguing about how exactly to match the fable to what we've seen in the previous canto. Now, the fable is pretty simple. It's the story of a rat who needs to cross a little swamp, and he cannot do it by himself, so he asks for help. He asks a frog that is just happens to be there. The frog accepts to help, and so the frog ties the little arm or the little leg of the mouse to his arm, to his leg. They start crossing, and then the frog decides to plunge underwater in an effort to drown the mouse and then kill it. But while the mouse is struggling to breathe and stay on the surface, a sparrow comes from high above, picks up the mouse, and with that he picks up the frog as well that was tied to the mouse and flies away. There are so many complications once somebody starts looking into this fable. My sense is that let's just enjoy how this fable that reminds us of fraudulence and again reminds us what happened in the previous canto, because that's what happened. People were trying to trick each other. However, it's true that at least one character, which is the mouse, has no malice, no fraudulence at all in the story, while all the characters in what happened in the previous canto had some sort of malice. So it would not be perfectly correct to equate, for example, the frog to Ciampolo, or even to Calcabrina, the mouse to Alichino, and the sparrow to Barbariccia. And there have been different suggestions. Somebody said that because of the innocence of the mouse, we should think of the mouse as Virgil and Dante in this fable. That's also possible, but it's really not clear. So I'm going to leave it up to you, whatever you prefer to, what you think that this Aesop fable or non-Aesop fable is referring to. The point of the fable seems to be that whenever you're trying to trick somebody, to defraud somebody, like the frog tried to do with the mouse, you can end up even worse than what it was before. Because in fact, in some versions of this fable, apparently the mouse gets free, and it's only the frog to get killed and eaten by the sparrow in the end. So there are some elements that are not completely clarified, but it's good to take it also at face value. Also because Dante says, I'm only comparing the end and the beginning of the fable to what happened. Then we have here Dante being really scared, thinking that the demons are going to be even more angry at them now after everything that happened, and so they're going to chase them. And as soon as Dante feels this fear, he turns around and he actually sees them in the distance coming very fast at them. It's very beautiful here how Virgil compares himself to a piece of glass. He said, if I was made of glass, if I was made of a mirror, really, if I was made of a mirror, so reflecting everything, I would not take your outward countenance in quicker than I do your inward one in this. It's a beautiful, very imaginative way to say it. At the same time, we need to be careful and not think that Virgil is reading Dante's thoughts in a somehow supernatural way. This, in Dante's interpretation, is simply heightened rationality, is the best that rationality can do in Virgil's behavior. It's gonna be Beatrice and the saints in heaven who do have this supernatural ability in the heaven environment to read in Dante's mind. But here, and what Virgil can do is much more limited. The way now Virgil helps Dante escape from the demons by picking him up and carrying him down the ditch into the sixth bolgia takes a lot of terzine for Dante, and very often I've seen Dante use a lot of words to explain something simple, and also the opposite, to explain something that is very, very complex and sometimes really difficult to understand. He uses only 3 words. In this case, it's simple. He says, it brings up a beautiful, really lovely simile of a mother. After having compared Virgil to a father many times, now even to a mother. Maybe to say that the intimacy is growing even more between them, between Dante and Virgil. And this mother who flies not standing even to put on a shift. And they get to the bottom practically of the sixth ditch, where the hypocrites are found as part of the fraudulent, the circle of the fraudulent. In this moment, the entire symphony, if we think about it from a musical point of view, of these 3 cantos, from allegretto, from really fast-paced, has a quick slowing down, and Dante, the orchestra maestro, decides to move it to more of a really slow, kind of largo andante pace when we start seeing the hypocrites. It's interesting to note that the etymology of hypocrites has been somehow misunderstood, not only by Dante, but by a lot of people in his times. As I mentioned before, Dante couldn't speak Greek. He didn't understand ancient Greek. So it's understandable that he sourced this type of meanings and this type of interpretations from Roman and Latin ancient writers that he could read about, and these writers would write something that sometimes was incorrect. It was a commonplace to think of mendicant orders and some members of the clergy as hypocrites. This was a commonplace. But the word itself, if you divide it in its Greek root, can be seen as hypo, which means below or under, and chrysis, which is gold. And this is where Dante really took this image of the golden cloaks, where that these people are covered with. But in fact, the actual etymology of the word hypocrisy is different. It comes from the ancient Greek word hypokrinein, which is a verb that means to play a part, to simulate, to act, and it comes from Greek theater. To play a part below, the below hypo comes from the fact that the actors were covered with the mask, so the voice was coming from below the mask rather than below the gold. So it seems like the gold had nothing to do with the etymology of hypocrisy, but in Dante's view and in Dante's interpretation, it certainly does. And that's where we see this stunning image of a procession, very slow going, of melancholic people who seem to be members of the clergy, but not all of them are members of the clergy. They are dressed like that and burdened by the terrible weight of these cloaks that are really heavy like lead. Where Dante refers to painted people, this probably means they had pale faces, they were extremely skinny and miserable in terms of mood. They resembled those of Cluny's monks. This was a Benedictine monastery in France, very famous at those times. And these gilded cloaks, golden outside, this type of gold outside and very heavy to bear really comes from the gospel. That's where Dante took the concept or the principle of the contrapasso punishment for the hypocrites. From the gospel, in particular from Matthew 23, where he says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like unto whited sepulchres, which appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and uncleanliness." Here he also refers to a legend of the time where he says, "The capes inflicted by Frederick." There was a legend, never proven, that Frederick II used this type of torture where he would place the condemned person under a cape of lead and slowly have this lead melt above the body of this person. But it could be simply a scary torture that somebody made up, because there's no proof of this. It's never been demonstrated. So out of these hypocrites, Dante points out and meets only two of them and gives them a name: Catalano and Loderingo. They are historic figures. They actually existed in a little before Dante's times. Catalano was a Guelph and Loderingo was a Ghibelline. And they were from Bologna, and they had been called to Florence to cover the political role of Podestà. Let's also remember that Dante very often thinks about politics. So when he thinks about hypocrites in general, it's not as much the individual hypocrisy in personal relationships, but rather he's thinking about hypocrisy in politics, because they are more damaging to the common good, to society. So they come to Florence, these two, to act as Podestà, and the fact that one is Guelph and the other Ghibelline, in principle, should keep a little bit of balance and peace because of the opposing interests. However, that's not how it worked out, because both of them, being jovial friars, which was an order that had been created recently and approved by the Pope, sanctioned by the Pope, they really were much more loyal to the Pope rather than the Emperor, or they were just loyal to the Pope. Therefore, when Dante mentions Gardingo District, this is a district, a part of Florence, where a lot of powerful and rich Ghibelline families used to live, and these two people, in their role as Podestà, didn't bat an eyelid or didn't move a finger when this district was completely razed. So this is what Dante is accusing them in this particular piece. They were hypocrites because of their allowing this to happen. However, as soon as he starts to, and this is the incredible realism of Dante, which I think it's unprecedented for his times, the way he starts speaking in Italian, "O frati, I vostri mali, ... and in Pinsky, "O friars, you're evil, but that was all I said," is suspended, and we'll never know what he was gonna say about to these people. My eye was caught by one upon the ground. This is, as we know, Caiapha, the high priest responsible for Jesus Christ's death, because Christ was in front of Pontius Pilate, and Caiapha was leading the Sanhedrin of the Jews, and he was the one who told the story of or the justification. He said, it's in the interest of the Jews or the social peace that you, Pilate, sacrifice this person, Jesus, because otherwise it's going to be a revolt, it's going to be very bad for everybody. So for that, he ends up with a terrible punishment, visually stunning punishment, and clearly well-deserved for in Dante's eyes, of being crucified on the ground with all these hypocrites stomping over him as they go on in the procession with extremely heavy burdens. The other high priest quoted here as his father-in-law is Annas, and they were part of the Supreme Council of the Jews. There is a moment here where Virgil stops and marvels at Caiapha in this position. And it's another very mysterious moment that commentators have not been able to decipher. Why is Virgil standing over Caifa, wondering? In Italian he's saying, Vidio maravigliar Virgilio sovra colui. Virgil is literally wondering about Caifa, and it's up to you to interpret, to understand why Virgil is behaving like this, and why Dante thought to include this type of behavior. My opinion is that it might be because Virgil, not being an inhabitant of Limbo, not being allowed to see Jesus, the only crucifix, let's say, that he can see in his life, even if it's afterlife, is Caiapha, and there is a connection, let's say. Maybe Virgil is wondering about this because he understands the enormity of what Caiapha has done, but we don't know. we really don't know. Towards the end of the canto, we see that Virgil has sees a final blow to his sense of mastery and authority, because the hypocrite is the friar, is even referring him to Bologna, which famously was the most important university town in those times, and therefore there is an irony, a sarcasm there to say, Virgil, how can you not know that the devil is a big lie, is the biggest liar of all, and all the devils are lying? How could you fall into their trick? Because finally he understands that he's being fooled by the demons, because he understands that there's no intact bridge to cross the sixth Bolgia, and he's very angry and also disappointed with himself. It's very clearly disappointed with himself, which is a psychological nuance that Dante gives it here. So that's how ends up for Virgil. The devil, he lies, and he is the father of lies, an expression that is present in the Gospel of John as well, John 8, while Dante is growing. The final comment I would like to make is maybe what I personally find the most fascinating and really most beautiful, in a sense, element of the 23rd canto. And this is the Italian word in verse 137, montar potreste super la ruina. Pinsky says, you can mount up by climbing the debris of rock along the slopes of the crevice. Now, what I find fascinating is that here is simply describing how this bridge is not intact anymore. In fact, ruina means ruined slope, basically. But in Inferno, we actually find 3 of these ruine, and the specific term, the specific Italian word that Dante uses is ruina, each of these 3 times, and they are very strategically positioned. The first one is in the canto of Paolo Francesca, Inferno 5, verse 34, ruina. The second one in Inferno 12, verse 4, and the third one is here. We know for sure that the number 3 has a deep significance for the Divine Comedy, for Dante. It represents the Trinity, represents perfection. So we know that these ruinas, or ruined slopes or rocks, have been caused by Jesus. In the harrowing of Christ, when he descended in hell, this was believed by ancient Christianity, to save some souls, some of the prophets, some people from Limbo as well, although not Virgil, and bring them up to heaven. Or some of these ruins are also caused by the huge earthquake that was caused by Jesus' death on the cross. But the fact that they are 3, it's almost like each of these 3 words, ruina, inside the Divine Comedy, are almost like a shiny diamond that constitutes this 3 stars, which are the symbol of Jesus, visible symbol of Jesus in hell. And this is really fascinating to see how Dante keeps including mathematical structures, symbolism, that if we're not careful enough, or if we're not told by some scholar like I was about this case, you're gonna miss it. So I really find that very interesting. They're going on and leading those burdened souls, following in the tracks of his dear feet of Virgil. I hope you enjoyed this canto and my couple of comments. So as I said, we only have 77 more cantos to go. Thank you for watching.